So last week we talked about the indecisiveness of the nice guy. And keeping with that theme, this week we're going to talk about nice guys don't trust themselves. You know, if you think about it, if you're a nice guy, you probably second guess every one of your decisions. You overthink conversations. You're consistently worrying, did I do the right thing? Did I upset her? Did I come off wrong? And underneath it all, it's just this deep, paralyzing fear of being wrong, of being bad, and getting rejected. And here's the truth. If you don't trust yourself, no one else will. Not your partner, not your kids, not your team, and certainly not the woman you've been trying to lead. Nice guys are plagued with this internal doubt, this insecurity. And so what we end up doing is we outsource our decisions, we avoid conflict and we play it safe, and we end up resentful because we're not actually living the life that is truly ours. And it's not just a decision, it's an identity problem. A man who doesn't trust himself will always be chasing approval and asking for permission and waiting for someone to tell him who he is. And women can feel it. They don't want to be your mother. They want a man who knows what he thinks, what he wants, and where he's going in life. So how do you become that man? Let's talk about that. Welcome to the Nice Guy Show. My name's Chuck, and I'm joined by my co-hosts Faisal Coker and Ari Graff. And the thing is, I've worked with hundreds of men who say the same thing. I don't know if I'm making the right decision. I don't want to upset her. I don't want to second guess. I keep second guessing everything, and I'm afraid I'm going to mess up. And this is more than anxiety. It's actually a fracture at the masculine core. Nice guys were taught from a very young age that being good is more important than being honest. Being liked is more important than being clear. And being safe is more important than being strong. So they become men who are over-explainers, over-apologizers, and over-analyzers. And we defend, we wait, we hide, and we wonder why our lives feel like we're living somebody else's blueprint. And that's when marriages crumble and why sex dries up and why men feel stuck in unsatisfied relationships and they feel invisible because you don't trust yourself. You'll always play small. So what do you guys think? Why do so many nice guys lack self-trust? Was there a moment in your life where you realized you didn't trust yourself? Faisal, I'm going to start with you.
Oh, 100%. There's been many times I've not trusted myself, not trusted my gut intuition, gut feeling, going with it, completely ignored it because I am so terrified, so afraid. And Chuck, as you were talking about trust and trusting yourself, it just came to me, how is a woman going to trust you if you can't trust yourself? And recently I just put on social media is when a woman trusts you, she'll follow you anywhere. When she feels safe with you, she'll follow you anywhere. So if you're constantly agonizing decisions, and I've done this so many times because I'm afraid of failure. Right? As my fractured ego is really afraid of making a mistake, getting it wrong. And the worst thing is, and I guess it is, I don't want to be told off. I don't want to be ridiculed. I don't want to feel like a little boy again and make a mistake and then just have finger pointing at me. I don't want to be shouted at because I made a mistake and then it upsets somebody else. So what I'm doing is pleasing everybody else, make sure that everything is right. And my perfectionism then kicks in, just making sure that I don't want to get shouted at, embarrassed, make a fool of myself, be a center of gossip and ridicule. So, it's really plagued a lot of decisions. And I've missed out on great opportunities because of that. Missed out on approaching and talking to a girl because I'm like, I don't trust myself or make a decision and I'm not sure and hesitated. I think hesitation is not only, it makes me feel cowardly, but also that hesitation just means that I missed out on a lot of things and I later regret it.
Yeah. How about you, Ari? You trust yourself?
I trust myself now, but I've been plagued by lacking self-trust virtually my whole life. And so, it definitely started early on. And I think it started with some really painful experiences growing up, being bullied, uh, not having friends, not knowing how to connect socially. Um, I think that's part of it. So not really trusting that I could figure those things out, even though ultimately I did. Um, so a lot of it comes down to, yeah, that fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of pain and discomfort. And so it requires having a thick skin. And like my parents, as loving as they are, I don't think they really taught me that kind of inner toughness that would help me trust myself. They actually validated that I was a fragile person. You know, that was a mistake that they made. So I really want my son to learn that he can make mistakes, he can have failure experiences, he can have rejection experiences, and that he's still good, he's still safe. That this is part of learning. So I don't want him to kind of go small like I did growing up, and how I've lived most of my life. So I really think that self trust is another thing that you practice all the time, and it's not. It's kind of like we were talking about in the indecisiveness episode. It's not so much about getting things right. Um, it's about trusting yourself to make decisions. It's being decisive. It's giving yourself that value and that that love that you can make a decision. Period. So we've overvalued getting the right decision, um, over making a decision, over just trusting ourselves and trusting ourselves to figure things out. So that's my rambling answer.
Yeah, I think, that I often say this to the guys I work with, that the foundation of every relationship is trust. Without trust, you do not have a relationship. Um, and so the most important relationship you'll have is the relationship with yourself. So if you don't trust yourself, you don't have a relationship with yourself, or you don't have a good relationship with yourself. And if you can't trust yourself, and part of the thing is that we know other people based on what we see them do, on their behaviors, but we know ourselves based on our intentions and our thoughts. And when I've let myself down many times, it's like, okay, I'm going to start exercising, and I do it for a day, and then I let myself down. I start to not trust myself and my ability to stay consistent or to stay with something. And what I've learned over the course of my lifetime is that I can trust myself to always get back up. I might fall down, I might quit something, I might fail at something, but the thing that I am always going to do is get back up. And I may even be down for a little bit while I'm kind of resting and regrouping, but I'm going to get back up. And I think it's that resiliency that starts to develop trust. And the other thing I talk about is like, the foundation of a relationship is trust. And that foundation is really fragile. I mean, it's easy to break a relationship with somebody, to break trust with somebody is just simply say you're going to do something and don't show up and do it. And that person won't trust you. And if they don't trust you, then they're not going to want to be in relationship with you. So when I let myself down, I start to say, well, I can't trust myself to do X, Y, Z, to be successful, to follow through, to do the things, that I'm always taking the easy way out or something along those lines. And when trust is broken, the only way to restore trust is to become trustworthy. And to become trustworthy means a consistency that happens over a period of time. So where my trust has come in is like, yes, I've failed. Yes, I've let myself down. Yes, but I will continuously always get back up and get back on the horse, or get back up on whatever it is that I'm doing. And as I've done that, I think I've developed more trust in myself. Not that I'm always going to make the right decisions or that I'm never going to let myself down, but that I can trust myself that I'm going to I'm going to persevere, you know. And I think that that's probably the most important lesson. The way that I've been to reestablish trust with myself is, yeah, I'm going to fuck up. I am. I'm a human, you know, but I'm also going to always get back up and try. And I think that that's where you can let yourself down, but you can also pick yourself back up. And I think it's really important that, um, what do you think is like how do you rebuild trust in your life if you've been people pleasing year after year? You know, because I think that's one of the ways that we sort of break our own internal trust is we outsource our trust to other people and we become people pleasers and we do what they want to do because we're afraid that we're going to make a wrong decision. And if I make a wrong decision, then I'm not going to be able to trust myself. And I'm going to trust myself, then, so what are some things that maybe you guys have done to reestablish trust in yourselves?
Chuck, first of all, you nailed it. Really nailed some really good points. Is that internal part of you're constantly letting yourself down. So if you're constantly letting yourself down, you're not keeping your own word. How is that gonna feel good for you and everybody else? So what kind of message is that sending to yourself and other people? This is why I run a private group. It's a small squad group that I have with just a few handful of guys, and in that we have weekly accountability, daily habits, so we can establish that trust. Is I'm going to say I'm going to do those habits, and then 80% of the time, 70 to 80% of the time, we're hitting those habits. And what that does is over time, it establishes trust, establishes that I can rely on myself. And because I can rely on myself, I feel more confident. My self-esteem rises. I feel more trustworthy, but also that I know when things go wrong, I can rely back on myself and get back up. And I think that's one of the scary things about nice guy recovery or any kind of self growth. I've had a lot of guys say to me, I'm really afraid that I will do all of this growth work, that I might revert back. So they don't really have that established trust. So for me, reestablishing that trust is really keeping your word. If you say you're going to go to the gym, most of the time you got to go and do what you say you're going to promise you do. And then sometimes, it's not going to be always perfect. I don't expect any human being to operate at 100%. But what you want to do is you want to get the tipping of where, like, when you keep making promises, keep saying things, but not delivering. Delivery, right? Men are judged on what they deliver, not what they promise, not what they say. And trust is built on what you deliver, not what you promise, not what you say. So deliver small things, small promise, consistently is how you start to establish trust, self-worth, and self-respect.
Yeah, I like one of the things Faisal does with his guys, it's he's got basically a habit list that you can create yourself, or the guys' habit lists are similar. It could be morning and evening routine stuff, and journaling, meditation, breath work, stuff like that, clean eating. But yeah, anything you can break into habits and behaviors, that's a way to build self-trust, and then to track it and to have accountability buddies. So these are all things you can get out of doing men's work. I think you don't necessarily get them from therapy. But that's more common in coaching and men's groups. So have those systems in place. Like you don't have to figure out how to trust yourself all by yourself.
What is that? Iron sharpens iron, right? So that like you have to have that left to my own devices, I'm going to be sitting around in squalor pizza boxes and, um, half drinking sodas. Because, and I was thinking as both of you guys were talking, it really comes down to this idea of tension again, right? Nice guys hate tension. It requires tension to trust yourself, to show up and do the thing because there's that moment of decision. It's like, am I going to work out today or am I not going to work out today? Right. And as nice guys, we hate tension. And so we try to kill the tension and we kill the tension. And when we kill the tension, we actually kill the trust in ourselves. Doing the harder thing is where we start learning to trust ourselves again. One of my favorite quotes is the right thing and the easy thing are rarely one and the same. So if I take the easy way, I'm releasing the tension, but I'm losing trust in myself. So the key is to really, when you come to those crossroads, is to do the thing that's often the harder thing that requires more tension. To get up, to be assertive, to be a leader, to do these things in our lives. And those are the things that create the tension. And as nice guys, we hate tension. And so I think the key again kind of comes down to this, like we have to be able to continuously retighten ourselves. And a story I heard a long time ago, and it's Faisal, you'll like this one because it came from Tony Robbins, was he was talking about his getting his piano tuned. And he said this guy came over and tuned his piano, and the guy's like, okay, I'm going to be back and I'll be back next week to tune the piano. And Tony's like, well, you just tuned it. Why do you have to come back? And the guy says, well, we create tension on these chords, and the tension wants to pull the chords back into the original position. And so I have to come back and re-stretch these chords, because if I don't, then the piano's just going to go out of tune again. And then I'll come back in, a month, and I'll come back in 6 months, but we constantly have to be retuning and retightening. And I think the way that we learn to trust ourselves is that when we go out of tune, rather than sitting in that out of attunement, is we get back up and we lean back into the tension and we retune ourselves so that we're showing up. And I think the more we lean into the tension, that's when we start to really trust ourselves, because we're being more consistently in tune on a regular basis.
And again, that brings us back to having your accountability group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and most people don't have that.
Yeah. Well, you think about, like, why do people have coaches, or why do they get personal trainers, or why do they have somebody that, most of it's accountability. I hired a social media guy a while back, and most of it was just like accountability, and then after our coaching was done, it's like, yep, I went back to, not posting regularly again. So just having, I know.
I was like, where is Chuck?
Where'd you go? He was so consistent for it's because I had somebody that was holding me accountable, right? And
we need that, right?
Yeah. I just need that touchstone, the guy saying, okay, what are you going to do this week? And then what are your, and so I think part of trusting ourselves is knowing, maybe trusting ourselves is knowing that I can't trust myself. And so I have to put in these
systems into place.
Systems into place.
Yeah, because then you're outsourcing what you recognize. Another thing I believe that's important for trust is, one, really listening to yourself. Really listening to yourself. So every time we ignore ourselves, our gut feeling, our intuition, and we go into pleasing mode, everybody else's mode, what you're signaling is what you're saying isn't good. What you're saying isn't right. What you're saying isn't of value. So we ignore what we're saying inside of ourselves. And I know that parenting does play an impact in this as well. And I like how, Ari, you mentioned about allowing your children to make mistakes, because then they need to be able to.
Wait, I have children? No, you got more than one.
Plural.
And be able to make mistakes, and then for them to be able to handle themselves and recover from that as well. And I do know, I do realize that helicopter parenting, too much parenting, can take away their autonomy, their own resilience to make mistakes. So knowing the fact that this is one of the story I learned was, for example, how many times have you done this? It's cold, it's freezing, and you tell your child or your kids, you tell them, put a coat on. And they're like, no, you got to put a coat on. No, I don't want to put a coat on. And you can force them, and then you go out. One of the psychologists says that when you give them that recommendation, hey, put a coat on. No. Are you sure? Just definitely put a coat on because it's really cold. And they say no. Let them walk out without the coat, because
natural consequences.
Because one, they'll learn consequences. The second thing is you're entrusting them, or they're learning to trust their own decision and not being overridden every time. So because all my decisions, I'm saying, I don't want to put a coat on, and mom's overriding my decision or dad's overriding me. It's like, oh, well, I can't make a decision for myself. I can't think for myself. So I need to it's always going to be somebody else making that decision. So I've done that. I was like, okay, cool. It's really cold out there. No? Okay, well, we're going to walk then. And they walk and they're like, yeah, really cold. And I'm like, okay. So you learn from that. So is that part of letting kids burn and so they can learn? And I think a lot of
letting
parents
kids burn. That's the message.
Well, burn your children. Faisal's parenting tip 101. Burn your children.
If you don't burn, you don't learn. It's like make the mistake from that and let that teach you. But don't burn your kids or anyone. Okay.
It's made me think about a situation from the past week. My brother and my sister-in-law, they have a 3-year-old son, and he ended up having to go into the hospital last week, which is,
burn stuff, was it?
It wasn't that. It was something else. It was, obviously it's every parent's fear is.
Yeah. And he's okay now, though, right?
Oh, let me get to the
okay.
climax. So
trust him. Trust the story.
Trust him.
He'd been having some kind of pneumonia off and on the past couple of weeks that they couldn't figure out. So they took him to the doctor, and then they asked him to be hospitalized, not because he was ailing so much, but he had this like wheeze that wouldn't go away, and they did some kind of scan, and they found out something was in his lungs. So then they actually had to put him to sleep and do a procedure with like a scope and some kind of tiny tweezers to get whatever that was in his lungs out of his lungs. And guess what it was? It was a small piece of walnut. It was in his lungs. And this kid loves nuts. Like he likes walnuts and almonds, like so my sister-in-law, who's on the overprotective side, the lesson she took from this was like, no nuts. You're just on nut butters now. Like we've got to like hover over him while he eats, and I think it's just like a fluke incident. But like, to me, this is an example of how parents can overcorrect. She's a great parent, but I don't think that's the lesson that we want to learn from this, is like, we've got to watch over our kids forever, that they're swallowing their food right.
How do you get a nut in your lung? That's what I'm thinking. I mean, I'm sure what you said was really important, but how do you get a nut in your lung?
You're just gobbling nuts, like.
Yeah, I guess so. You're like eating nuts like crazy.
I've talked about trust issues. I just had a conversation with a prospect client, and he was really hesitating to take on coaching. And one of the things that I asked him, said, I gave him all the evidence, the testimonies, everything. And for most guys, they're like, cool, I'm done. And most successful men, they're like, okay, cool, there's enough data there for me to make a decision and I trust. And it's not like he's a stranger. He knows my work. He's been on my training before. And he said, I have real bad trust issues. He says, I can't, he struggles to move forward. It's very debilitating for him. He just says, I cannot move forward. I have these real trust issues. And I see this in a lot of clients as well when they come into the coaching practice and they just says, I can't make decisions. And when I'm not making decisions, when I cannot trust myself, not only is that wearing out my self-esteem and my self-worth, but it's also turning her off. And
So
because they can't trust
how'd you
themselves,
respond to
we went through a conversation with some of the stuff that we talked about. And then I said, look, this is not going to change. I said, look, whatever decision you make, you got to go with it and stop looking always back. That is a wrong decision. And what he realized was one of the things about the fractured ego is that it's looking for perfection. It's like the number one answer. He's looking for like a magic pill. So he's got that syndrome of the magic pill syndrome. Like one thing, this is it. I've got to trust it. When I trust it, it'll solve all my problems. So he's got that problem to overcome. And I said, well, this is where we need to actually do more one-to-one coaching to really look at this, because his ego doesn't want to get it wrong, doesn't want to make a mistake, it doesn't want to fail and then be embarrassed by it. So there's a lot of shame that we need to work on.
Yeah, and that's important. I think nice guys are filled with shame, and I think that shame is probably what keeps us stuck from trusting ourselves, because we don't want to feel that sense of shame of like, oh, I made the wrong decision, or I made a mistake. That really hits that central wound in us of feeling bad and feeling wrong and feeling like broken, that there's something wrong with us, and so we'll avoid anything that might expose that. And as a result of that, then we don't actually trust ourselves, which just compounds the shame. One of the things I think where trust comes into play, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, is with consistency. That when you break trust, you have to, in order to regain trust, it comes from a consistency of doing the same thing, being consistent with going forward. And consistency, I think, is probably one of the things that I, at least as a nice guy, in recovery, have struggled with is maintaining that consistency. The consistency is I'm always getting back up, but fits and starts is my thing. It's like I'll get on something and I'll start and I'm like doing really good, and then this is a great example. I just got back from being on vacation, and so it's like starting my workout routine again. It's like I've had 2 weeks, I was getting exercise by walking all over the place, but 2 weeks where I haven't really worked out. And now I'm a little bit out of the habit, and there's this big resistance to go up and get my exercise in. And so when there's this interruption that happens in the consistency, it's like really moving beyond that and leaning into the tension. It says, okay, we're going to do this anyway. But I think it's a consistency over time is what builds trust. And if you've broken trust in your relationship, it's the same thing. A lot of guys, especially nice guys, we break trust in our relationship, and the way to get the trust back in the relationship is consistency over time.
without looking for validation
Without looking for validation. Yeah.
from the partner for our
Right.
consistency?
Right.
I think that that's part of self-trust that maybe we haven't emphasized enough. Is it's it's validating your own decisions. It's not looking for other people to validate your own decisions.
Yeah. I think that's an
And
excellent point.
that also gets back to what Faisal was saying, like, is essentially like we're not having a conversation with ourselves enough. So you need mechanisms to have a conversation with yourself, to talk to yourself, to ask yourself, what do I want? What do I feel? What do I need right now? that's why I think journaling is such a key habit. Whichever way that you do it, even if it's just talking to yourself out loud. You know, are you actually having a productive conversation with yourself as opposed to just spinning, which is what most nice guys do? It's just worrying and ruminating. You know, the writing process, while you can obsess and ruminate in your writing, I believe it's a way to interrupt the repetitiveness of most nice guys' thought process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a good one. Self reflection. You know, where do I need to go back and either make amends or recorrect? You know, and doing that on a consistent basis. All right, guys. Well, let's go ahead and wrap up this episode. Again, just want to thank you guys for contributing here and this. And if you're listening to the show on Spotify or Apple or whatever, please give us a like. And if you're watching us on YouTube, give us another like. And do us a favor, man. Share the podcast with other people because, you know, we're not getting anything. I mean, we're not getting anything out of this. We're not getting anything out of this. I mean, we're not getting paid for it or anything like that. We're doing it because we want to be of service to other men and especially guys that are nice guy recovery. And so if you know a nice guy, make a decision and send him a copy of this podcast. So be sure and like and subscribe. Follow us on your favorite platform.